Welcome to episode 13 of the Icario podcast. And first of all, Happy New Year. This is the first episode of 2021. So if you're listening to this, Happy New Year and congratulations on surviving 2020. That is no small feat by itself. Now, in today's episode, let me just give you a very quick preview before we jump into the content. In today's episode, we talk about the competitive advantage. The topic is competitive advantage. So we talk about what you can do to stand out both in your personal life and in your professional life. And you'll discover why competitive advantage is kind of one of the phrases I use quite a lot. And it figures into the way I think about things. And one of the ways in which you can gain a competitive advantage is to become a focused, hyper-productive badass while everyone else is super distracted and spending, 8 hours a day scrolling through social feeds and stuff like that. And on that note, I also want to mention something that is very pertinent for when we publish this episode. So if you're listening to this when it's freshly published, note that we are about to open enrollment for the Focus and Action 9-week live class. Focus and Action is a productivity class. It's a goal achievement class, essentially, that I do with the Icario team. This is the second run of the class, and we had amazing results with the students of the first run. If you want to make 2021 your best, most productive year ever, and you want to reach your goals this year, then click the link in the show notes that goes to Focus and Action, where you can sign up and reserve your seat. And you can also go directly to icario.com/focus and action, all one word. And the show notes are at icario.com/013 for episode 13. icario.com/013. With that said, let's get into the episode.
Hello once again and welcome to the Icario podcast, where we help you optimize your life, break free from the human zoo and become a force to be reckoned with. Once again with your hosts, Ollie, myself, and here he is.
And I'm Shane. And today we're going to talk about what I guess is like one of my catchphrases a bit, or is one of the things I say obnoxiously often.
Competitive advantage. That's my Shane impression. I need to work on it.
Could you tell that wasn't me?
If this is audio, could you tell?
Yeah, competitive advantage is a phrase I use quite often, and I guess it's one of the ways. It's kind of one of the ways in which I look at the world. Is I look for competitive advantage. Now, it's probably something that I kind of trained myself to, or I built the habit of looking for competitive advantage as an entrepreneur, because obviously, if you build a business, you're always building a business in a competitive environment, and you have to figure out how I have to do something like better than someone else, essentially, in order to have a successful business. And so I guess that's probably where it comes from.
But you've also said you're not a particularly competitive person.
Yeah, I'm not a particularly competitive person in the sense that, if you go, let's see who can do more push-ups. It's like, I really don't care if I can do more push-ups than you or not, So it's just like, I don't have that emotional, I have to try and win kind of thing. But yeah, it's more like just in a practical sense, or in terms of necessity. As an entrepreneur, it's definitely something. I think it also maybe comes from earlier in my life, where I just felt like I was behind everyone, and I had to try and figure out how do I keep up or catch up. But also, I do think that outside of entrepreneurship and outside of explicit competition, there's a lot of application for this, because we find ourselves in a competitive world. We find ourselves in a competition, whether we like to or not. So again, even though I'm not naturally competitive, and I would prefer not to be competing all the time. But it's like, the world we live in, you're thrust into various competitions from a pretty young age. Whether you're competing, you're trying to get good grades so you can get into an especially good school. You're trying to get a good job, career, etc., etc. It's all a competition. And then even things like dating is also a form of competition. So it's like can't really avoid it. So since that's where we find ourselves, we might as well start thinking about, how do I gain a competitive advantage? And I think it's useful to be very deliberate about this, which is probably not a surprise because I think it's useful to be deliberate about almost everything. But yeah, it's, whatever it is, whether you have as an entrepreneur, as a career in business, or as a career in basically any career, even for creative pursuits, you are essentially in a race, you're a competitor, and how well you compete in relation to others can make a huge difference to your life quality. And I don't want to come to this from an overly toxic place, right? Because I think competition can be very toxic, but competition can also be, you can have wholesome competition where it is uplifting for everyone. And it's not, that's really the question of how disadvantaged is the loser. And in our world at large, in many cases, the loser is very, very strongly disadvantaged, which is something that I think we would do good to try and fix. I think it'd be better to create a world where you can't fall too low, even if you don't perform well. But be that as it may, the world we find ourselves in is if you don't compete well, that can really cause a lot of suffering. And as I mentioned before, I'm highly in favor of figuring out how to not suffer and helping people not suffer.
Of course. And initially, it just seems like another aspect of this is that kind of the middle way. It's like you're not getting rid of competition altogether, or trying to deny it, or trying to assume that it doesn't exist naturally in the universe, like in our societies and stuff. But you're also not going too far to the extreme of everything's a competition, and kind of ignoring the negative potential sides of that.
Yeah. And in terms of the ethics of competing, I think there's one very simple rule to follow, which is never win by sabotaging or pulling back your opponents. Right? It's never win the race by tripping up everyone else, or by poisoning their food, or whatever you could do to basically make it so you don't have to be better. They're just handicapped, or they can't compete, or whatever. Never compete like that. Only compete by doing better, right? That would be the ethics of it. Now, how can you be deliberate and strategic about gaining a competitive advantage? The first thing I want to talk about here is something that ties in with a lot of what we've talked about before, which is there's generally a competitive advantage in non-conformity. So whatever everyone else is doing, whatever is normal, there's not going to be much to gain there. There's not going to be much to gain by doing what everyone else is doing. And there's also not going to be much to gain generally by trying to do more of what everyone else is doing, or by trying to do what everyone else is doing, but harder, So that's the first thing where I would say that strategically, the mistake that we often make is we look at, okay, what are other people doing? It's I'm going to do that, but more and harder. Well, you're going to run into limits pretty quickly, And so if you want to be strategic about it, you want to find ways to do things differently. So a business example of this would also be okay, a typical mistake, you see that there are other similar products and you just go, well, I'm going to make something cheaper. Well, how are you going to make it cheaper? It's you have to work longer hours without getting paid more. You have to put in more and get less in return. Well, that's what's called a race to the bottom. Someone else is going to be willing to do it even cheaper, and someone else is going to be willing to do it even cheaper. And in the end, it's everyone's miserable. Basically nobody wins. So that's not a great way to compete.
And that's a business example.
Yeah.
A dating example would be, say if let's just say you're on a dating app and you swiped right and you matched with a beautiful lady and you thought, oh, okay, right. So she's probably going to be messaged by loads of guys. But you know what? I'm going to message her constantly. I'm going to send her way more messages than any other guy. That should improve my chances.
Ouch.
And it's Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So So instead, what we want to look at, basically, a very simplified way of saying that, we want to look at where is everyone zigging so I can zag in a way that gives me an advantage. And now this ties into, there are a couple of opportunities that are kind of glaring, and it ties into the human zoo stuff we've talked about before, which is that the environment we find ourselves in causes a lot of suffering and a lot of problems. And by opting out of that, you can do a lot better. So to give you a very simple example, this is kind of I think this is probably the first example of me trying this out in my life, is that at some point, around 16 or something, my peers started drinking and smoking as well, but let's stick with drinking. And it became like normal, every weekend they'd go out to bars and clubs and stuff, and then next week talk about how incredibly wasted everyone got and so on. And I'm sure it was even worse for you because you're from the UK.
Jesus Christ, yeah. I was going to say it, but yeah, it kind of just goes without saying at this point.
Yeah. So anyway, so this started becoming a norm, right? People around me did this. And again, because at the time, I felt like I was generally behind everyone else. This is one of the reasons I decided not to start drinking. And so I just never did. I never started consuming alcohol as habitually. I never got drunk, and I never got into the habit of going out. And that was one of the reasons I felt like, okay, look, if everyone is getting drunk every weekend and then sleeping off their hangover and stuff, well, if I don't do that, that gives me an advantage. Okay, that's just a little edge. And I think that worked out relatively well for me. But we have other issues that are like much more pervasive, that are lowering, again, if you think of it as a competition, it's kind of lowering the power level of competitors around you. So one of the things we've talked about before, right, it's like the fracturing of people's attention. It's like nobody can focus anymore. People are constantly distracted. People live in a very noisy digital environment. And so in this environment, you can look at that and say, there's a huge advantage in cultivating the ability of deep focus. And Cal Newport is like the champion of this, I would say. So he wrote the book Deep Work. And that's one of the points he makes, which I think he's absolutely right about. He's basically saying, look, we live in a world where more and more, if you're someone who can spend extended periods of time in deeply focused work, whether it is deeply focused like research and learning or deeply focused like creative work, you are an exception. You are a huge exception, and like your ability to create things, your ability to produce a valuable output is going to be heads and shoulders above what is normal. So if you want to make yourself valuable, if you want to have a great career, if you want to have this kind of competitive advantage, this is one of the things to invest in because of how extremely the other way all of society is leaning. And I think that's a great example of being aware of the norm, right? And the norm changing towards being constantly distracted and so on, and seeing, from that arises an opportunity where now being able to do that is much rarer and therefore much more valuable than it used to be a long time ago.
Yeah, this is, and there may be another example you come up with regards to relationships or dating or whatever, but this is kind of why I stopped using dating apps. So this is now the second dating example I'm coming up with. You can tell what's
on your mind.
You can tell what's on the brain, can't you? I got rid of dating apps for just this instinctive kind of feeling that, hang on, so everyone's on dating apps now, which means that it's kind of becoming more and more normal just to swipe for your dating opportunities.
Yeah.
But it's like, what if I was the exception in a woman's life who just approaches her and says, hey, how's it going, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, wow. And after doing that, the response has been like fascinating to me. It's usually like surprise almost, like, hang on, you're really doing this? It's like, yeah. It's like, wow. Okay. It's like, and it immediately separates you from just the 30 dudes that are in a Tinder or Bumble inbox, just like swiping a message and it's like, oh, can I meet you? It's like, so that's zigging where other people zag, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And also, even if you just think beyond that, you're cultivating, you're talking to people in the real world, in real life, and you're cultivating the skill of like building rapport with someone, that kind of real life interaction, versus what everyone else is doing is they're cultivating the skill of taking the perfect selfie to get more matches, and then coming up with a super clever pun or whatever to try and get attention on the opening line and so on. Well, does that carry over into what makes you an attractive person? I would argue not that much. Right?
Yeah.
I would argue it's much better because, and this is something I've also talked about before, is like the opportunity cost. All the time you spend taking the selfies and editing, or taking the pictures of yourself and editing those pictures to make yourself look especially handsome and cool and adventurous and whatnot for your dating profile. All the time you spend getting better at texting is time you're not spending doing something else. And ultimately, you still want to meet in real life. You still want to have a real relation of some form with this person. And that, at the end of the day, the question is, are you an attractive person? Right? Eventually, if you do a good job at all the virtual stuff, she will meet you in real life. Then the question is, are you a good... And if you spent all this time getting really good at taking these great pictures and editing them, well, what's the effect of that? You don't actually look that good in real life, right? Well, that's not a good start. And then you have developed all these ways to be witty and funny, or you look it up on Reddit or whatever in your replies. But in real life, you're kind of boring. That's not good.
This is something that I did quite a bit on Tinder, is like Google, what are great things to put in your Tinder bio? It's like, Jesus Christ, man. So it just at some point occurred to me that this is starting off on the worst foot possible.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I be something different that she'll like?
Yeah.
It's like, and then eventually we'll meet, and then it's just like, okay. It's like
prepare to be disappointed.
It's like I was catfishing her with my wittiness. It's like, none of these lines are mine.
Yeah.
It just started everything on the wrong foot altogether.
Yeah.
So yeah, I decided against that. But the other thing is social media. And when I first came to Lisbon, that's one of the biggest things. It's one of the things that I had struggled with since 2016, pretty much, was social media. And, my smartphone addiction, it kept coming and going. And all along, I kind of knew that moderation didn't work. And it wasn't going to, because I'd already gone around the houses with this to no effect, to no lasting effect. And I was just as addicted in 2019 as I was in 2016, even though I tried my best to moderate my behaviors in that way. So I knew that it was just a case of, this has got to go. And I noticed the reason why I decided to just completely get rid of both Facebook and Instagram was because of the opportunity cost. And it was you that introduced that concept to me. It's like when I'm spending my time and my focus and my energy on Facebook, Instagram, curating these posts, writing these, spending energy writing a decent post, and is it going to get all the likes and stuff, and me I'm keeping check of all that stuff as well. Like, what is this costing me? And the reality was, there was just a ton of things that I wanted to do that I knew would take effort and depth and persistent practice to be good at, like making music, like writing, and the list goes on of all sorts of stuff I wanted to do, including getting good at reading and stuff, that I couldn't see myself doing while I was all over social media. And it was really enticing, because they're just, when you're on social media, everyone else seems to be on social media, everyone's posting about their life, and it seems like there's this ecosystem, and it's, everyone else is doing it, so it's hard to pull away from it. But the opportunity cost is the concept that really hit home when you introduced me to that. It's like, when you're doing this, what is it costing you? What could you be doing with your time otherwise? Yeah. And when I sort of really had an honest, an honest dialogue with myself about that, I was like, this is not worth it. Yeah. Like, at all.
And I think, it is a really good thing to bring up as well, because I think we often underestimate that. We feel like, I'm just checking quickly. It's like because you don't actually, I think you have an awareness, like, you don't actually want to spend your life doing this. I'm just going to check quickly, right? And you really want it to cost you no time, but it costs a lot of time. So yeah, opportunity cost is a big one. Now, also on this, we'll run through a couple of specific examples of like opportunities where you can countersteer the norm. We've already gone through some, and on the note of social media, a very closely related one is that it's becoming the norm of everybody's basically consuming algorithmic content, which is basically whenever you're scrolling through a feed or you're getting notified, that is an algorithm that's trying to figure out, how do I get your attention? And as it turns out, the way to get people's attention is often because the brain has a negativity bias. So negative stuff is going to work better than positive stuff. And short, evocative spikes of emotion, that tends to work. So this is why you scroll through your feed and you have images that are funny or shocking or something like that. And it takes very little time to take the entire thing in. And this is also why memes are so powerful, because instead of reading a huge article or something, it's an image with like 2 or 3 lines of text. Right away, boom, this makes me angry. Okay, or boom, this is funny or something, right? And it can keep going. It can keep going. High, like very shallow touch, high frequency. That's the kind of content that everybody's consuming now. Also, very typically, right, people share articles on social media, but they don't read the articles. It's really about the headline and the featured image. And so that is becoming the norm. That is how people consume information. That's the majority of information is being consumed in this form. Algorithmically determined short form content. So how can we zag to this zig? Well, you can deliberately seek out long form, in-depth content instead. So you can realize that because everybody is being fed these algorithmic sources, this algorithmic junk information, basically, it's like the junk food equivalent of information, right? There's going to be some negative effects of that. Not only on people's, one of the things that's well documented, it's bad for people's mental health. And that's also, it's not great in terms of a competition, right? If you want to compete, if you want to perform well, being miserable and depressed and anxious and so on is not going to be great for you. But also, you can imagine that there is a lack of deeper engagement with topics. There's a lack of real understanding of what's going on. And in many areas, think about investing, for example, having a deep understanding of what's going on is key to being successful. So you can deliberately seek out non-algorithmic content and long-form content. So non-algorithmic content is basically, don't click on the thing that's being suggested to you. Rather, seek something. So instead of just scrolling through a feed and kind of letting things in the feed catch my attention, that's algorithmic content. If I go to a search engine, or even, on YouTube, I can scroll through the feed and it's going to give me all this nonsense. Or I can type in something. I can type in a question and then look at videos that answer that question. I can find lectures and TED Talks and things. TED Talks is one of those things, right? My YouTube feed almost never recommends a TED Talk to me. But I watch quite a lot of them. But it's just like the algorithm is like, no, this is not the highly engaging stuff. Instead, here's a 10-minute video with a thumbnail of someone being super worried or something, right? It's like, okay, I ignore that, and instead I look for the TED Talk, or I look for the 3-hour Joe Rogan interview with the guy who wrote the interesting book or something like that, right? So I seek it out, and I deliberately engage with long-form content of my choosing. And my favorite version of this is books, right? You read books. It's great. I actually love it. This is one of the things that I love about books. Obviously, they're not all great, but I love it when someone has one topic and they spend 300 pages diving deep into that topic. I absolutely love that. And that is a deliberate, in-depth engagement. That is not, it's not an algorithm that shows me that book. So again, if you're competing in any field where being well-informed and intelligent and having, kind of a well-connected network of knowledge and information in your brain is useful, this is where there's a huge competitive advantage over just almost everyone these days.
And he does say that in Deep Work, which is a great book, how the ability, like individuals who have the capacity to learn complex subjects quickly and to create things quickly and work in a focused way, he suggests that this will become more and more of a competitive advantage if things keep going the way they're going.
Yeah. And this, by the way, what we're doing right now, so we've mentioned this book, Deep Work, twice now. This is an example of a non-algorithmic recommendation. So we are making this, and it sounds almost bizarre to call it that, but algorithmic recommendations are so prevalent today that it's worth pointing out. Like us telling you this is a good book to read, we're not telling you this because we think, ooh, that's going to make you click, that's going to make you come back, that's going to increase your engagement. No, we're like, this is a good book, this is going to upgrade your life, read it. That's a real human, non-algorithmic recommendation. And that's also something, by the way, just links on the internet, like not on social media, right? If you're reading a blog post and the person who wrote the blog post says, hey, here's another interesting thing, and they link to it, that is manual. A human being said, here's a thing that's worth looking at. That is a non-algorithmic recommendation. So, yeah. And also to spin off of that, there's another kind of related but also separate area of competitive advantage is just in general, like you were saying, like the engagement with complexity, because people seek instant gratification and simple answers. And we're being fed lots and lots of instant gratifications and simple answers. If you cultivate the engagement with complexity and with depth, that is even beyond what we've said so far, can be a competitive advantage. So that's another one of those things. Another example is again from my experience as an entrepreneur. So among everybody who wants to be an entrepreneur, most people are always looking for the shortcut, basically. Which, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? It's like, if I can spend years and years building a business and hiring people and making a product and shipping products and all this kind of stuff to make, let's say, $1 million. But I could also just do something really simple and click a button to make $1 million. Obviously, that's what I'd want. Like, I wouldn't say no to that either, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants the click this button to be a millionaire solution. Obviously, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's like no skills, no experience necessary. You don't even need to know how to work your laptop.
Yeah.
I think I saw in one webinar.
That's the typical guru pitch. Yeah, it's like, this is the opportunity to make all this money with just, even if you're the dumbest person alive, you can do this, basically.
Yeah, so what the fuck are you telling me about it then? If it works that well, why are you telling millions of people about this shit?
But that's the thing, right? The guru will pitch this super easy money solution because obviously that'd be great. and obviously it's very tempting, right? A well done pitch for such a thing is very tempting because who doesn't want easy money? But yeah, to varying degrees, right? It goes from the totally obvious scam of I'm going to teach you how to become a millionaire overnight. Totally obvious scam. But it goes further. Like if you run a business, you're going to need software and tools and things to run that business. And even relatively legitimate solutions will usually oversell themselves as like, this is the key to gaining traffic and an audience and so on. It's like this social media sharing tool. It's like, no, it's not. It's just a utility. But like a problem in entrepreneurship is that we're constantly distracted by these things that look like opportunities. Oh, I have to use this software. Oh, I have to use this service. Oh, this business model is super hot right now, And again, there's a competitive advantage in not doing that and instead kind of doing something relatively boring consistently, because the reality of running something like an e-commerce business, that is pretty damn boring. Really, it's a lot of like spreadsheets and logistics and stuff. This is not cool, But if you're like, okay, everybody else is chasing all this nonsense that inevitably doesn't work. If I just spend time doing this boring thing, getting good at this boring thing. That's the competitive advantage.
Yeah. And there's a book by MJ DeMarco called Unscripted, which I'm going to stick in the show notes too, where he talks about this. He talks essentially about you get paid in this marketplace for the value you provide. And if you can solve a complex problem and market that, you've solved a complex problem, you'll be paid for that. Mm-hmm. It says it's in simplifying it, but in a nutshell, that's kind of how it works. And in order for you to solve a complex problem, you need to be able to deal with complexity, and solve things that most people are not necessarily willing to even go. Most things. To solve something that most people are not willing to solve because of its complexity, because it's difficult.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So one more example. So there's a final example that I want to get to, but before that, another quick one, which is just that, again, a cultural norm more and more is like everybody's getting in debt over everything. It's just normal to buy stuff on credit and to have all kinds of loans and mortgages and so on and so forth. And this is something that erodes your financial power. And so again, you can just see that, okay, this is normal and it's easy. It's becoming easier and easier and easier to buy stuff on debt, right? And to accrue debt. And you can see that, okay, this is a norm. It's becoming easier and everybody's doing it. So there is an advantage, there's a competitive advantage in not doing it. And we talked about this briefly before in the How to Get Your Shit Together episode about finance, where, I started saving and I avoided debt. Like, I've basically never been in debt for a very brief period. I've had a taste of debt where some of my money was locked up in a project and I couldn't get it out for a while. And I had a taste of what it means to be in debt and I hated it. But I've never truly been in debt. And yeah, that's also one of those things where, look, not having debt and instead having liquid assets available and saving however small an amount it is, it can become such a huge advantage, when the time comes around. And this is often, for example, when some kind of a crisis hits, when there's some kind of a massive downturn, people who are sitting on cash are the people who are going to be rich in the future. That's like the housing crash, for example, of 2008. That's terrible for everyone who has debt tied up in real estate. It's pretty damn good for people who are sitting on a pile of cash, right? Because suddenly cheap real estate. So, and yeah, that's one of those things, long-term advantage of not doing what everyone else is doing.
Don't be in debt. Don't buy things on finance that you can't afford.
Yeah, totally not worth it. So the final example is this is the one that took me the longest to uncover. And it's like a high complexity, high investment competitive advantage. But here's the thing. Our culture, and I'm talking about like Western culture here, is hyper individualistic. And there's a competitive advantage in not going it alone. That's basically the one thing that I'm seeing more and more clearly and that I've been tapping into more, in my own work, in my own life. So we highly value individualism. Right? We always put the individual at the center, and it's about your individual accomplishment, it's about your individual responsibility and so on. And everyone's kind of on this lonely path of you build your career, you build your accomplishments, your success, and so on. And so why is there a competitive advantage here? Well, not only is everyone zigging and there's an opportunity to zag, there's also, this is fundamentally incompatible with something in human nature, which is that humans are a tribal animal, a herd animal, if you will, or a social animal. And so this culture leaning towards individualism so much leaves this gap of opportunity where it's hold on, aren't we supposed to be cooperative? And aren't we logically able to accomplish much more with a group of people than alone? And for me, this is one of the reasons Icario exists, and one of the reasons Icario started right away with a team. So, because the easier way and the safer way to start this kind of business would have been to make it a personal brand. To make, Shane talking about stuff. Well, I would have come up with something better for the brand. But
the Shane Talking About Stuff podcast. Welcome.
Yeah. I mean, that's what this is sometimes. But but the point is, right, it would be easier to just say, like, this is a personal brand and I'm doing my own thing and I'm keeping my costs low and I'm building my own little empire and I'm selling my products and making money and so on. The thing is, I've already done that. And one of the things that occurred to me is, like, there's this leverage in income where if you do it well, if you build a business well, as an individual, as a single person, you can end up earning more money than you need. You can end up earning more money than 5 people need. And that got me thinking. It's like, okay, the right kind of team of people logically would be able to accomplish this kind of thing much quicker, or accomplish more of this kind of thing. So if you think about it, like, if you could clone yourself, that would remove a lot of the friction that comes from, like, teamwork and team culture and so on. If you could just clone yourself, well, clearly, if there were 3 of me working on this, we could get that result of making, let's say, $1 million a year much more quickly. But then here's the next thing to think about, right? So I can do a bunch of work by myself and end up making $1 million a year, and I can live really well on that. Okay. But really, the thing is, what I want that freedom, right? I want enough money to be able to do what I want to do with my time. And often we make like sacrifices, like, okay, I'm working long hours and so on and so forth to get that thing. Well, what if there were 3 of us? Wouldn't that mean that everyone can have a relatively relaxed work pace? And in the same amount of time, we could still end up making $1 million a year. And guess what? $1 million a year is still enough for 3 people to live really well. Okay? So that is the fundamental idea of, hold on, everybody's out there struggling to do it on their own. If you can get really good at teamwork and at building teams, doesn't that mean that at a lower level of, like, tension and pressure, you can reach the same goals more quickly? And because there's so much leverage in it, like, it doesn't matter that you have to split the spoils between more people. That's the basic idea.
That makes a hell of a lot of sense. Yeah. When you consider it as well, that most people, they say, like, the term financial freedom's come up a lot recently. Yeah. It's like it's being used way more. Like, I don't necessarily want to be rich. I want to be financially free. Mm. When you consider that it is freedom of time that people are actually seeking, that kind of makes a hell of a lot more sense.
Yeah. I also want to quote Naval Ravikant again. I believe I've quoted him before on the podcast or in other content. He has this great quote of saying, actually, I don't know the exact quote, but it's something like, success comes down to playing long-term games with long-term people. So, because there is this, again, there's an individual can achieve such outsized results, and in corporation, we can achieve even greater results and even faster. And there's kind of this cumulative effect. If I'm building my own skills and I'm building my own capability, and you're building your skills and capability, and both of us are leveraging it, like, way beyond what we need for ourselves, and we're cooperating and coordinating, there's huge power in that. And there's far more power in that than, working with this person on this thing, then working with another person on another thing, then jumping to another person and so on, right? That's why long-term people. So it's not just playing long-term games with, like, a rotating cast of people. It's playing long-term games with long-term people. So, and also if you think about it, and I know that a lot of people probably don't have much experience of this, but you can think about it as, like, there's lots of problems on the way to financial freedom, for example, that an individual will be bashing their heads against this problem for ages, that with a team of 2, 3, 4, 5 people, you can just blast through it. So, and the only like downside of this is that it introduces a lot of friction and complexity. So it's not like you can just gather any 4 people and be like, okay, we're gonna do 10 times better than I could on my own.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to say.
Yeah.
Is the more people you introduce, that in itself will create new potential problems and points of friction too.
Mm-hmm. And it is definitely a long-term game, because initially you can get more done by yourself than if you're trying to coordinate a bunch of people to do it. Initially, you're spending more time on things like building team culture and figuring out who does what and just building that coordination. You spend more time on that than you gain back from having more than one person doing the work.
Yeah. So we've slipped into speaking mostly like from an entrepreneurial sort of space again. So someone who's not an entrepreneur, how does this necessarily apply to them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, so there as well, like the people you surround yourself with, your social circle, will have a huge impact on the outcome of your life, basically. And that is true also for non-entrepreneurial stuff. So even if you just think about that as, if you think about something like academic success, if you have a study group of the right kind of people with the right kind of cooperation, then you can do far, far better than if you're just always studying by yourself. Because like in a group of people, it's much more likely that there's going to be someone in the group who can explain the thing that you don't understand in a way that makes sense to you. And then you can explain some other thing that they don't understand in a way that makes sense to them, where that is a more efficient process, or a potentially more efficient process, than you trying to struggle with all the things that you find difficult, them trying to struggle with all the things that they find difficult. And then there's also the aspect of having a group of people. You have the accountability factor, where you yourself maybe would struggle to study consistently enough. But if the group just meets every Friday and Wednesday at this time, then you show up and you do it. And it's more fun because it's with other people, and so on and so forth. And then again, this long-term game, because you're then building these friendships and these connections. And that can later on, that can pay off, because then you go out into the world and they do something and you do something, and later on there might be an opportunity to connect. It's like I'm working in business A, you're working in business B. We can make a deal happen, because there's some potential synergy between these businesses. And the reason we can make this happen is because we know each other, we trust each other, we know how to work together, and so on, right? So that would be like an academic example. And I mean, an example, like we can go back to dating examples, like you've seen the effect that a group of people can have on this, right?
Yeah, 100%. So me and a couple of the team members, we go out occasionally, as you know, and we just approach women we find attractive and just say hello.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, I would never have done this if it were not for another member of the team, and I'm not using names because I don't know what they really want. But another member of the team came to Lisbon and was really amped up for trying this.
Yeah.
Initially, I was like, it scares the life out of me.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing his interest in this and his passion for it, I was just like, yeah, okay, you know what, let's go. And I'm so glad that he had that influence on me. Because I would never have done that, I don't think. I might have reached the conclusion later on in life at some point that I'm actually going to, try this. But having him there really helped.
Yeah.
So that's an example of me not going it alone. In addition to that, ever since I joined this men's emotional support group a couple of years ago, I don't think my life would be the same at all if I'd not have done that. Other guys modeling emotionally healthy, emotionally intelligent behaviors just with who they are and giving me feedback on things and stuff. If I had attempted to do all of this alone and solve all of the problems alone, including the dating, including the personal development and emotional well-being stuff, if I had attempted to do all of that alone, I don't even know where I'd be, to be honest.
Yeah. And this is a bit of a preview of an Icario thing that we will, that definitely have more on this as time goes on. But here's the preview of this suggestion is like, start building a tribe, start building a social circle that is explicitly there to create like growth and opportunity for the people in that group. So people meet for all kinds of reasons. And again, the cultural norms around this are usually not that great, right? People come together to get drunk, for example. Well, you can have a group of people come together where you'd like that the point of this group, the point of us coming together is to encourage each other's growth and development and success. And we can start playing that long-term game, and it doesn't have to be specifically about building a business or specifically about improving your social life or dating or something like that. It can just be, look, we're all interested in growth. We're all interested in living a better life and becoming better people. And let's simply have a group of people who enable that in each other. And where you can let, so first of all, you can experiment and practice with building team culture, but also you can let everyone be a positive influence on everyone else. Because yes, someone in the group is like going to encourage everyone to exercise and be like, oh, we're going to go, outdoor adventures and stuff like that, where you end up going camping in the woods that you never would have done alone, and you love it, but it's only because that one person in the group is like spearheading that, And then someone else in the group is the bookworm and is constantly recommending great books to everyone. So you end up reading all these books that you wouldn't have read otherwise. And then someone else in the group is whatever, So you let that happen by letting everyone be a positive influence on each other, and by also having exchanges about it, where we sit around, like, this is something we do all the time, right? You sit around and talk about how do we improve ourselves? How do we get better at what we do? How do we build our skills, etc., etc.? It's something we constantly do. We spend time exchanging on topics related to personal growth with the groups that we assemble.
Yeah.
And so that's what I recommend you do. That is, everyone, basically, look, if you're listening to this podcast, you're interested in personal growth. And you're not the only one. There's lots of people. But it's almost a taboo sometimes, right? It's like, ooh, better not let someone catch me with a personal development book. It's like I'm gonna put a fake cover of Playboy magazine over it, so it's not less embarrassing,
Yeah, especially in the UK. I mean, it's becoming a bit more, a bit less taboo to read self-help books and stuff now. But it's still a bit like, you read self-help. It's a bit cheesy. It's a bit American, a bit corny, that. And it's like, for God's sake.
So yeah, that's, assemble people around you who are also into this, and start deliberately building this team. Start deliberately building this tribe of people who are here to uplift each other. And again, to tie this into what we started, like, you're hearing me say this and you're like, I bet you don't know anyone who does that. And you're thinking, that's pretty weird. Exactly. There's a competitive advantage here because everyone's suffering away by themselves. And everyone's doing their personal development as this like lonely, individualistic quest. There's a huge, huge competitive advantage in starting to build a tribe of people who can do this together.
And you need to go first.
Yeah.
Like, be the one who assembles that tribe.
Yeah.
Go first.
So that's it. That is on the topic of my obsession with competitive advantages. And that's our main takeaway, the main suggestion. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear your ideas of how you can apply this, and also anything you struggle with. So if there's things where you struggle to see a competitive advantage, or if you're like, okay, this idea of assembling a tribe sounds cool, but I have no idea how to do that and I'm kind of scared, or whatever it is, get in touch. On YouTube, you can leave a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can go to the show notes and basically go to icario.com. We have comments under our podcast episodes. You can also go to Anchor FM / so that's anchor.fm / Icario, and you can click a button there to leave a voice message. You can get in touch.
Please do that. That'd be so cool. I'm really looking forward to the first voice message we get.
As of this recording, we haven't gotten any yet.
As of this exact recording, we don't.
But we're also miles ahead of the publishing schedule, so who knows?
We're just so goddamn efficient. We're
Yeah.
just so productive.
We're so productive.
It's such a drag, man, how productive we are.
It's shocking. It's shocking. It's like we basically this is all because of focus and action, you know.
Yes.
It's like we are just.
What's that? I forgot what focus and
interesting
action
that
was.
you ask, Oliver. Focus and action is the class that we teach. It's a live class that we teach, or well, alive, you know. It's a online. I don't know how to explain that. It's an online class that we teach, which teaches people how to become extremely focused and productive.
Just like we are for being way ahead of the schedule.
Exactly. So if you want to have this kind of problem, it's, oh my God, we have too many podcast episodes.
I've done too much work.
I've done too much work. What am I doing with myself?
What do I do with the rest of my time?
If this is the problem you want to have, then you should go to icario.com/focus and action, all one word. I mean, only the focus and action part. You type on Icario, DOTCOM. It's like, no. / So, Icario.com / and then focus and action, one word. God damn it. How do people do this? Anyway, you can figure it out. You can see if that class is currently open for enrollment and become like dangerously productive.
Lethal,
absolutely lethal.
Careful.
You'll need a license for this. Is like weaponized productivity.
Yeah, be careful. All right, you know.
Anyway, those are some of the things you can do, but primarily leave us a message. That'd be cool. Because it would also, in general, just be cool to hear your thoughts and your feedback on this stuff. Because obviously, we want to make these episodes as useful to you as possible, and by sending in questions and things like that, you help us steer the content in the right direction and talk about the stuff that is most relevant and most useful for you.
I think that's it.
All right.
That's it from us.
That's us
for this week.
signing off.
Take care.